Alright, hey everyone, welcome back to another segment of Tip Time where we take a deep dive into your questions. Today I'm going to be covering a broad statement and something that I've seen be a really pertinent issue in a lot of the questions that we've been receiving, and it's the biggest problem in longboarding. Now, of course, there's lots of mistakes that we can make as longboarders, especially all the way along our journey, but there's one in particular that seems to be really prevalent in beginner surfers, and it's something that I even find affects my surfing today, and I've been surfing for 15 years. The solution to this problem follows something called the 80-20 principle that I wanted to delve into, but let's get into that in a minute. First, to make this stick, I wanted to contextualize it a bit and give you another example. And so what we're going to do is delve into the world of skating. So if we go into skating for a second, and let's imagine there's two types of skating that we're thinking about. There's street skating and then there's bowl skating. Street skating, we need a board that's super dynamic. It can move very quickly underneath our feet for a lot of flips and tricks and grinds and everything like that. It needs to be able to react really quickly, and of course it can't be too heavy, it can't be too bulky. We then might think about our bowl skating, which within its context, it needs to perform a little bit differently. It needs to be able to do long carves along the walls of the bowl and grinds and be able to maintain speed and pump along the wall of the bowls as well. For something like this, we might have thicker and smoother wheels. We might have a bigger body to the board as well to make sure that we can really use the turns and lean into the rail. Both boards are designed really well and fit within their own context, but we wouldn't necessarily swap one for the other for this reason, because they don't really fit. So this all seems pretty simple and it makes sense, but I wanted to apply this same methodology to surfing and us as longboarders in particular. Now, of course, you're probably understanding that I'm going to go down this road of longboards and shortboards are very similar to this. But longboards have their advantages and shortboards have their advantages, but we can often forget this. Especially being on longboards, if we're trying to throw a really big turn, sometimes we can think of the weight of that board as being a limiting factor and a hindrance to our ability to perform. But what I'd really like to bring to light in this video is that longboards do have key advantages that it's really important we make the most of, and we should try and integrate these into our surfing to help serve us rather than create a hindrance. Now, what I'm going to do is cover the key advantages to longboards in a further video, but just quickly, there's clear advantages in terms of the weight of the board, the effortless speed that we can generate through longboards, and the amount of rail that we can stick into the water and carve through our turns. So simply put, the answer to this video that I'm going to walk through right now is, in longboarding, oftentimes we force the board to turn rather than move with the board through its turn. And so this is a big common problem that I see in my own surfing from when I was starting through to now sometimes, and that I see time and time again with newcomers and people trying to learn new maneuvers in longboarding. But let's break that down. Now, it might seem a bit funny to bring this up in a surfing video, but I wanted to bring up the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 principle, which is a statistical rule that explains that 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort. And whilst this doesn't match completely with surfing, I do like to use this as a really good thing to draw your mind back to when we're thinking about our efforts in longboarding and how we go about performing on the wave, because I think it's just such a good way to think about how we're going to go about this. In the past, the common mistake that I've made when I'm trying to learn something new is thinking I needed to force the board into certain positions or push harder than I needed to in order to create a longer arc or line for my turn, which for the most part simply isn't true. And I do see this time and time again for new longboarders also. If we think about what makes a good longboarder, it's typically not because we can exert more force through a rail or through the tail. It's because of the technique that we're able to apply to the board and the positioning on the wave. So let's think about how this can solve our problems. Coming back to that 80-20 rule, if we think about longboarding and the key problem being pushing too hard and forcing the board, what I want us to remember is to try and dial it back to about 20%. And this is especially true for all longboarding turns. Bogging a rail and face planting is typically the result of us pushing too hard. So instead of trying to muscle your way through a turn and push as hard as possible to draw out that line and send out as much spray as possible, try and draw it back to about 20% and see how the turn feels and how it actually performs. I think you'll be extremely surprised, especially if you get footage of the turn itself, of how nice and smooth that turn looks and how we actually don't need all of that force to push a turn through. Some key examples are here that I'd like to point out is things like surfing from Harrison Roach, from Tyler Warren, from CJ Nelson, all of these guys, it's about body positioning and it's about their weight distribution on their board from the tail to the rail. It's not about pushing as hard as possible. We don't necessarily need to. A lot of it is to do with our technique and how we're applying specific pressure to different parts on the board. And if we think about this and our common problem being bogging a rail, we really should learn turns by applying only a small amount of pressure on first, and then if we need to, we can start to exert more pressure on the tail. There's a few techniques that I might touch on the channel down the track and of how to make those turns more powerful and the best way to introduce that, but it's certainly not an all or nothing method where we just apply as much pressure as possible. So as a wrap up for this one and some nice little things that you can use as a takeaway. In longboarding, we need to travel with the board and not ahead of it. We need to allow it to fit in with the wave and mold with what the wave is doing and not force it into certain positions. There are some exceptions where we can try and push harder, but generally speaking, these have diminishing returns, and the ability to be light, soft, and smooth on the longboard pays dividends if you can have that at the center of your approach. A big takeaway is make sure we're using the advantages of longboards rather than thinking about them as a hindrance or a liability, and use the beautiful aspects of longboarding to enhance your surfing. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you're enjoying what we're doing here with the channel, please consider subscribing or check out the links below. We'll catch you on the next one.